Hi, I'm Michael Lang with Nextel Academy. This video is part of an introductory course on building websites using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Today we're going to continue from our last video in which we created a web page and we did some CSS. So there were two prior videos to this one. So check those out first. There should be a link at the top of the screen before you check out this video. So we're going to look at this screen over here. This is the site that we created in the last video. It has one page, index.html. It's got a CSS file, site CSS. We've got some colors of text specified in there. We have an image file for an SVG file. So we're going to start by adding some JavaScript to this page. We're going to start really simple. So the way to add script to a page is with a script block. So a script block just means a script tag, a script element. That would be another way to say it. So inside of a tag, we'll do script, and it'll have a matching closing tag with a slash in it. Now inside here, we can do any JavaScript that we want to do. So if you wanted to, you could look at W3 Schools, you could look at some other resource site, and you could look at some examples for how to do anything you want in JavaScript and copy that over. Okay. So we're going to build something from scratch here. We're just going to start with the most basic thing. In any programming language, the first thing you're ever going to want to need for any program is a variable. A variable is a container to hold a value. The value could be a number, it could be a string, it could be a Boolean, which is a yes or no value or a true or false value. It could be a complex object that has many sub-properties inside of it. For instance, you might have a teacher object that has a first name, a last name, and what languages they teach. You could have an array type variable which stores any number of items in it. So maybe it's an array of numbers and it could store one number or it could store 100 numbers. It could vary how many numbers are in it in a given time. So let's start by defining our first variable. We do that in JavaScript with the var keyword, var, and we do a space and then whatever we want to call this. So this is just a container to hold a value, so we can call it whatever we want. So I'm going to just do one called num, so it's just short for number. I'm going to abbreviate. And then you can, if you want, you could just enter right there, and now we declared a variable, but we didn't set a value into it. Okay. But most of the times you're going to want to set an initial value. So let's say in this case, I'm going to set it to 7 as our initial value. Okay. There's a lot of things we can do with variables now that we have them. We can maybe add some numbers. So here I'm going to say num is going to now equal the current number plus 7 more. Okay, so we're just adding 7 to the prior value in that variable. So this isn't a really realistic scenario. You'd probably just say, well, just start as 14. I don't need this line of code, right? Well, I'm just trying to show you like how do you manipulate variables once you have them. So presumably there'd be some other code in between these two lines of code. All right, so what another option we could do? We can make this line a little bit shorter. There are some shortcut operators. So this is an assignment operator, the equal sign. So this is going to assign what's on the right side of the expression into what's on the left side. So this side will be evaluated first, and then whatever the result of that is will be put into here. Okay. So in this case, we're going to take the current number value, add 7, 14, and then that's then going to be assigned into number again. So this variable will now hold that value of 14. So let's see, what if somebody had a number 7 inside of a string? Okay, and we wanted to add that to number. What would that do? So we could say num equals num plus 7 again. Any guesses as to what this will be? Might think, okay, it's starting at 14, add 7, that's 21, right? That's not exactly what's going to happen. But how do we know that? So one way to do this is what I'm going to encourage you to do as you're doing a lot of JavaScript debugging. Just open up a browser and let's just play with it. So W3 Schools has a try it yourself. You could just come in here, you could type whatever you want and tell it to run it. We don't really need that. You could just start up any old blank browser session and open up developer tools. So you do that with right click and then pick inspect. We went over that in the prior lessons, and I'm just really not going to use what's on the page at all. I'm going to ignore the elements. I'm going to switch over to console. Now in here we can do the same thing. Num equals 7. And so I could say, oh, what's the value of num? It'll tell me it's 7. Okay, so we could say, okay, what is, now num is going to be equal to num plus 7. Now it's going to tell us, okay, the result of that is 14. So if I ask for num again, it's going to return 14. So now we could do that other experiment. Well, what if I do num equals num plus 7 inside of quotes? So this is a string. You do strings with quotes around them. What happens then? Huh, that's not 21. Let's see, what did it do? It's got 147. So if we look at that a little more closely, it starts with 14, and then 7 was just added to the end of it. So what it's doing here is what's called coercion. It's coercing the types to be the same type before it does the operator. Because you can't take a number and add a string to it. That makes no sense whatsoever. So what JavaScript is going to do is it's going to convert them both to be the same data type, and then it'll add them. So in this case, it's converting the number on the left side into a string, and then adding the other string to the end of it. So it's just doing string concatenation. That's why it ends up being 147. Okay, and notice it does have quotes around it. It is not being output as a number. It is no longer a number. So if I do num plus 5, it's 1475. So we are in string concatenation mode. So you want to be careful when you have variables and knowing that they're the type you think they are before you add them. So what if we want to go back to setting num equals 7, and we want to say, well, what if we wanted to safely add a number that is in strings? What if we want to say, no, we want to convert that string into a number and then do the math? Well, you can do a little shortcut operator here. We can do a plus symbol in front, and then what that's going to do is it's going to convert this into a number, and then it's going to put it in the expression. So now it'll do normal mathematical addition. So a couple little shortcuts there to make that work. So yeah, Chrome Debugger is like the best way to figure out that your code actually works the way you think it does. Because when we're over here in VS Code, we're not seeing it run, right? So you can think in your mind what you think this is going to do, but you might not always be right. So you can just take this script as it is, bring it over here, paste it in, and now it runs that as if it was a code block. So you don't have to run a page and go through that whole cycle of making something trigger the code to run. You just paste it right in the console window. All right, so that's something really basic with JavaScript. I was going to point out there's something a little more simpler you can do here. Like this is quite a bit of text for adding a number to it. There's also a shortcut of doing plus equal. It's just another operator that does the same thing as the equal and the plus. It just compresses it down a little bit. So this is the addition coalesce operator. So it'll take this value plus the value that was in it before and put that as the result into that variable number. So you couldn't just do that. All right, so let's try some other data types. What else can we do? There are complex objects. They are referred to as JSON. If you've ever heard someone talk about JSON, they don't mean the name JSON, they mean JSON. So they just shortcut call it JSON. It means JavaScript is the JS, and then the ON is object notation. So it's a way to declare an object inside of JavaScript. So let's see, how do we create one of these? So if I wanted to start with var teacher equals, and then an object you do with curly braces. So curly braces do a lot of things, right? We can do them in if statements, we can do them in functions. There's lots of places we can use curly braces. So the meaning of the curly brace depends on what is around it. So in this case, it's after an equal sign, so it says, oh, you're just trying to define an object. Okay, so it's going to know what that means. If you just did the curly braces in here and you did some code inside of it, it would think it's a function or a code block. So be careful with that. So we've got var teacher equals some object, and now in here we can define some more variables inside of it. It's not really variables, it's more of properties on an object. It's just different terminology, but you can think of it the same way as just variables inside of a variable. So I'm going to declare some properties. I'm going to say first name, and here we don't use the equal sign. Okay, we use a colon because we're defining a property name on the left and then a value on the right. So it's just a little bit different syntactically. So I'm going to say, okay, first name, Mike. I'll do a last name, my last name, and we'll do a languages. So what languages do I teach? So how do we declare a list of items? You might think, okay, well, I'll just do a string, and I'll do comma separated values in here. SQL. Okay, but this is going to be a single string. So if I wanted to say, well, I want the second language out of the list, you're going to have to do a lot of parsing of the string to get that out of there. So we really just want to declare this as an array. An array is a variable amount of items inside of like a list. An array is like a list. Let's say it that way. The way to denote a list or an array is with square brackets. So inside of here, I'm in the array. I can put whatever I want inside here. So I'm going to declare more strings, C#, SQL. Okay, and we'll just start there. Okay. Alrighty, so I've got a teacher object with a first and last name and languages array. So let's see, what can we do with that? How do we use it? So what if later on I decide, oh, I actually know another language, but that code up there is already run. It's already in a variable holding that value. I can't just go write new code now. I have to find a way to dynamically add items to that array. All right, so we can get down to these properties, first of all, by starting with the variable name. And we do a dot character, and now VS Code is even going to show us there's some other things inside of here that we can use. So I can output these values, or I can grab a value and I can manipulate it. So at this point, languages, if I hover over it, it says here is a string array. That's what the two square brackets after the string mean. So I can do any kind of string functionality off of the end of this. So for instance, I can concat, I can do all sorts of things like filter. Filter would be the way to pull a subset of the array of a subset that matches a certain criteria. Lots of cool functions here that do a lot of cool things. Push is the one that I really want. This is how you add an item to an array. So in this case, it says the new elements you want to add. So okay, I'll just go ahead and add JavaScript. All right, so there we go. Now I've got this teacher object, this languages property has been updated to add another language. Let's go ahead and test this in our Chrome Developer Tools just to make sure it's working as we expect. I'm just going to paste that code block in there. You'll see I just output a 3. What is that? That is the output of just this final push. So push returned the array itself, and so the length is the default property, so it just output the default property value. So I can drill down into it. Teacher dot, let's see, languages is the one I'm interested in. Oh, okay, there's the 3. It's got these 3 values in it. So I know that that push did work. It added it to the array. So, all right, good. We know that works. All right, so what else can we do? We're not going to manipulate any elements on the page today. We're going to save that for the next lesson. But we're going to try to use the values to build some messages. So let's start. The next thing we want to do is, let's just output the value of their name as part of a sentence. So one thing you always have access to is this console object. This console is the Chrome Developer Tools console. So like over here, it's this window. So we can write stuff to that. Okay, so if I do console, there's a log method, there's a warn method, and there's an error method. The only difference is what color will be the text that's output into that console window. So I'm going to do a log, and I'm going to build a message here that says your teacher is space. Now I want to use the variable of their name. So one way to do that is with string concatenation, which just means using the plus symbol. Concatenation just means the plus symbol. There's also a method or a function available to do it. But we'll go ahead and do this, teacher.firstname. Let's see, what does that do? All right, so I'm going to take this and put it back over in the console and see, well, what does it do with our teacher object? And there we go. It says your teacher is Mike. So it did put those strings together in the way that I expected them to. All right, now I can actually run this page too. So I'm going to open with the live server, and we'll see I'll open up the console window here, and it did output your teacher is Mike. So that worked as expected. All right, let's back over to the code. Okay, what else can we do here? What if you wanted to have a different block of code execute in different conditions, or you wanted something to only happen if a certain thing was true? That's where we use conditionals. A conditional is something like an if statement, or an if-else statement, or an if-else-if, else-if, else-if, else statement. You can go as many else-ifs as you want. Check the courseware at nextelacademy.com/courseware to see like a lot more examples of that. But we're going to go ahead and do one here. We're going to do if, and in here is our condition, okay? And then in curly braces here is what do we want to do in that case, okay? So in the condition, I need to put something here that's going to evaluate the true or false. If it evaluates the false, the code inside of it won't happen. If it evaluates the true, the code inside will happen. Okay, so in here I'm going to say if teacher languages.length equals 1, then what do we want to do? We're going to write console log they only know, and then we want to say what language it is. So we'll go ahead and say teacher languages 0. So we're going to just pull that first language out of the array. We know there is one item because length is 1, so it's always going to be able to pull out the 0th element. Arrays, when you access them, 0 is the first item, 1 is the second item, and so forth. So it's a little different than normal counting, but it's something you have to get used to in general in programming. Arrays are always 0 based. All right, so if we output that, what if there's another condition we want to say a different message if they know more languages? So we could say, okay, console log, they know lots of languages. I'll put a comma in the string that's output, and then I'm going to say, well, what languages do they know? So we're going to do another string function here to see, well, how do we take all these values together and put them together into one string? So teacher languages, and then there is a method called join. And then you could say, okay, a string used to separate one element of the array from the next in the resulting string. If omitted, the array elements are separated with comma. So in this case, I don't need to put any arguments in because I want a comma to separate them. Or if you say, well, I want a comma and a space, then I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to put a comma and a space. All right, so let's see what this does. We'll go over to our little playground here. Oh, actually, we already have a page running. And I do not believe I saved the other file, did I? I did not save. Now it'll reload. And now the console is going to output your teacher's mic. They know lots of languages, C#, SQL, JavaScript. So that's the sampling of languages I know. So there we go. So we did hit our else condition of our if statement, and we used our string join to concatenate those together. Okay, so for the next thing to do, we might want to reuse this logic more than once. We might want to push a new language under the stack and then update the message that is said. So for instance, this logic to push a new language under the stack and then update who the teacher is and what languages they know might want to be done more than once. So maybe there's a button that adds a language and then it wants to change some text on the page as a result. So we want to put that in a reusable block of code. We don't want to copy this whole code and then do it down here again in a click event and then do that again on every click event. We want to do it one time and then call it from that one shared spot. So the way to do that is create a function. There are functions in most languages. In C# they call them methods. Other languages they call them procedures. And in JavaScript we call them functions. And they all mean the same thing. So to do that in JavaScript we use the function keyword, and then we can create the name of the function, display teacher. Actually, let's add language. And we're going to take a teacher. So a method can specify in the arguments what does it take in to do its work on each time that logic is being reused. That's how the function can do something slightly different every time it's run. is because you passed in some arguments to say how to run a little bit different this time. So this time we'll need a teacher and we will need a language. Okay, so we can start by just taking all this logic up here where we add the language, cut that out of there, and I want to paste it inside the function instead. Do my Control-Alt-F to format the file. Alright, so now this teacher is that variable. Language is not being used yet, so I'm going to take that and I'm going to overlay it here in place of JavaScript. So now that this code has now been more genericized. Now there's nothing in here that does not take an argument that's passed in. Okay, so the next thing we might want to do is actually invoke this function. Well, here, because if I start with a teacher and then I add a language, let's see what that looks like in the page that's running. So we don't have any messages being output here. If we look at our sources, we've got teacher and we've got add language. None of these messages that are on the console log in this function are actually appearing in the console log anymore. The reason for that is because when you declare a function, that doesn't actually make the function logic inside run. You have to actually invoke the function so that the things inside the function will run. So if I just wanted to add a add language call right here, I could do that. I could pass in teacher and I could pass in JavaScript. Okay, I'll run that page. See, oh, there we go. Now it's back again. Your teacher's Mike, they know lots of languages, and here's the new list. Okay. So what if I want to add another language? I'll go ahead and do that. So imagine this is on another button click or it's on some other kind of user event, maybe where I've entered something in a text box. Let's say if I know, let's just put in Angular. Save that, and what happens now? Oh good, now our console is writing out this display logic 2 times. So they know lots of languages, it lists 3, and then the next time they print it out, it shows 4. So it is updating this array on this teacher object, and the languages property inside of it is being updated each time I call this add language function. And our new display logic is running each time. So that's how you declare a function, that's how you call a function. The next thing you'd want to expand on is how do you do it on a click event of a button or on some other event on a page. And we're going to cover browser events and how to interact with the page and change the page dynamically in our next video, in the next lessons in the courseware. You can see more of our courseware lessons at nextelacademy.com/courseware to dive into more details on these topics. See you in the next video.